Even when the battlefield ends, some wars keep breathing in silence. He was a Navy SEAL who vanished into the mountains with nothing but his rifle, his faith, and a loyal German shepherd named Ranger. They said his mission was over, but God had other plans. 2 years later, when 4 young soldiers went dark in a snow-choked valley, he rose again, not for glory, but for grace. What he and his dog did next would rewrite the meaning of loyalty and prove that even in the darkest storm, miracles still walk among us. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The wind slid down from the Alaskan mountains like a ghost, whispering across the frozen pines and swirling thin veils of snow through the valley. Beneath the pale morning light, Ethan Cole sat on the porch of his cabin, wrapped in an old green parka whose elbows had worn through years ago. His face, weathered and square-jawed, carried the quiet fatigue of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little since. Gray flecks threaded through his beard, and a scar curved beneath his left eye, a faint reminder of shrapnel from a forgotten war. His gaze was distant, unfocused, like someone who had learned to live with silence until it became his only friend. At his feet lay Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd, broad-shouldered and alert even in stillness. His coat was thick and black with streaks of amber near the chest, and his amber eyes reflected the same steady vigilance as his owner's. Ranger was a soldier in spirit, trained to guard, track, and understand without words. He lifted his head when the wind shifted, nostrils flaring as if he could smell memories carried from far-off battlefields. Ethan reached down and absently rubbed the dog's neck. "We're getting old, partner," he murmured. "But I guess peace was never built for men like us." The cabin was small. 2 rooms, a wood stove, and a hunting rifle hung neatly above the doorway. Outside, snow pressed against the windows in uneven waves. Ethan had built the place himself after retiring from the Navy SEALs 6 years ago. He had tried city life for a while in Anchorage but found that the noise of traffic reminded him too much of helicopter rotors. So he retreated to the forest's edge, where he taught survival training and occasionally trained working dogs for local search and rescue teams. It was a quiet existence until the phone rang that morning, a sound so alien that it made his pulse quicken. He glanced at the old satellite phone on the table, hesitated, and answered. "Ethan Cole," he said. The voice on the other end was steady, firm, and unmistakably female. "It's Sarah Mitchell." Ethan froze for a moment. "Sarah?" "Yes, it's been a while." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell had been his commanding officer during his last deployment in Afghanistan. She was tall, around 40, with the disciplined bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in uniform. Her hair, once jet black, now carried strands of silver, usually tied back in a strict bun that matched her precise, no-nonsense tone. Beneath the military sharpness, though, Sarah had always carried something more, a quiet empathy, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. Ethan remembered the day she pulled him out of a combat zone after an IED took half his unit. That day had changed both of them. She lost faith in command bureaucracy. He lost faith in the world's purpose. They hadn't spoken in years. "What's this about?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Arns exhaled slowly. "We've lost contact with a special reconnaissance team operating near Kinnick Valley. 4 men. Their last transmission was garbled, something about enemy movement and signal interference. The storms cut off all air support. No drones, no comms." Ethan frowned, standing to stare out across the tree line. Snow was falling harder now, thick flakes drifting like ash from heaven. So why call me? You have units closer to Anchorage. We need eyes that can work without visibility, a mind that can adapt in silence. We need someone who doesn't freeze under pressure. You're the best sniper I ever trained, Ethan. You know that terrain. You hunted there last winter. He was quiet for a long time, hearing the crackle of static between her breaths. You're asking me to go back out there? I'm asking you to watch over them, Sarah replied. No direct engagement. You'll provide overwatch and guidance from your position until extraction. The weather's worsening by the hour. If anyone can keep them alive until we get support, it's you. Ethan looked down at Ranger, who had risen to his feet, tail stiff, ears forward. The dog seemed to sense the change in the air, the sudden gravity in his master's voice. Ethan could almost read his eyes. We're going back, aren't we? Memories flickered through Ethan's mind. The chaos, the noise, the blood that never washed away no matter how much snow fell on it. He had promised himself he'd never hold a rifle again, but there was something in Sarah's tone, the same quiet authority that had once pulled him out of hell. Send me the coordinates, he said finally. Sarah's voice softened, almost like a sigh. Ethan, thank you. Don't thank me yet. He hung up and stood in silence for a moment. The wind outside had shifted, and the forest whispered again. Ranger moved to the door, waiting. Inside the cabin, Ethan moved with mechanical precision. Years of training had never left him. He unlatched a wooden chest beneath the cot, pulling out the M2010 sniper rifle, black steel and calm purpose. The weapon gleamed faintly under the lantern light. He cleaned it, checked the optics, loaded the mags, and slid the rifle into its weatherproof case. His motions were slow, deliberate, almost reverent, as though he were handling the bones of an old friend. Outside, the world was white and merciless. The trees bent under the weight of snow, their branches groaning in the cold. Ranger bounded ahead, his paws crunching through the powder as they made their way toward the ridgeline. Ethan followed in silence, his breath visible in small clouds. He moved like a shadow among shadows, his body accustomed to the rhythm of terrain and hardship. As the wind roared over the valley, his thoughts returned to the voices he'd once heard in the field. Laughter, commands, screams. All gone now, leaving only echoes. At the crest of the hill, he paused to scan the horizon. The valley stretched below, half shrouded in fog. Somewhere out there, 4 soldiers were trapped in the storm, and he was their only chance. Ethan knelt, set down his rifle, and whispered to Ranger, "You ready, boy?" The dog's tail wagged once, firm and sure. He felt a strange calm settle over him. Not excitement, not fear, but purpose. It was the same feeling he used to have right before a mission began, the sharpness of a man reborn through necessity. He exhaled slowly, fog spilling from his mouth. Let's bring them home. As they disappeared into the storm, the snow swallowed their tracks behind them, erasing the line between past and present. Only the wind remained, carrying the faint echo of destiny, and the silent promise of a man who had once sworn never to fight again. By the time Ethan and Ranger reached the ridge overlooking Nick Valley, daylight had surrendered to a thick curtain of gray. The storm was building fast, sweeping through the mountain pass like a living thing, cold, hungry, merciless. Snow whipped across the slope in spirals, biting into his face and clinging to the fur-lined hood of his parka. He dug into the drifts, carving out a shallow snow blind, the kind he'd built countless times in hostile deserts and frozen tundras. Ranger settled beside him, his breath steady but watchful, his black fur flecked with white snow that melted into mist as he exhaled. The dog's ears twitched every few seconds, tuned to sounds the human ear could never catch. Ethan laid prone, adjusting the bipod of his rifle, eyes pressed to the scope. Through it, the valley below appeared ghost-like, blurred by the falling snow. Movement flickered, shadows advancing. The SEAL recon team came into view, 4 figures in winter camouflage, moving in a staggered formation along a frozen creek bed. Their steps were disciplined, but the way they checked their surroundings told Ethan they were uneasy. The lead man, probably the team leader, raised a gloved hand, signaling a halt. Ethan zoomed in and studied him. He was younger than expected, maybe mid-30s, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, carrying an M4 rifle fitted with an ACOG sight. The name tape on his chest was visible through the snow glare. Reese. Ethan recognized the type instantly. Confident but careful, the kind of man who had earned leadership through competence, not arrogance. Reese crouched near a boulder, scanning the ridgeline as though he sensed unseen eyes. "Sarah," Ethan whispered into his mic, voice barely audible. "I have visual on the team. 4 operators moving north along the frozen channel. No contact yet." Sarah's voice crackled softly in his earpiece. "Copy, Ethan. Keep them in sight. Weather's worsening faster than forecast. Air support grounded until further notice." Even through static, he could hear the weight in her tone. Professional concern wrapped around personal trust. "Understood," he said. "We'll hold position." Ranger gave a low growl, deep and uncertain. Ethan's fingers tightened around the rifle. "Talk to me, boy. What do you see?" The dog's nose tilted eastward, hackles rising. Ethan followed his gaze through the scope, sweeping across the distant ridges. For a moment, nothing. Just white silence. Then, barely visible through the storm's veil, he saw it. A faint shimmer of movement against the darker slope. He adjusted focus. There were men, at least a dozen, crawling into position along the rocks, their outlines merging with snow-colored tarps. Their posture was organized, their spacing deliberate. Not locals, not amateurs. Each carried heavy packs, and one man hoisted a tripod with something unmistakable, a mounted PKM machine gun. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Sarah," he murmured, "we've got movement. East Ridge, 1500 meters from my position. Possible ambush formation. These guys know what they're doing." Sarah's tone sharpened. "How many?" "At least 12. Maybe more behind the ridge. They've got belt-fed weapons and overwatch setup. The SEAL team's walking into a funnel." "Hold your fire," Sarah ordered, calm but urgent. "We don't have confirmation they're hostile yet." Ethan stared through his scope, breath steady. He didn't need confirmation. He'd seen the pattern too many times, how the lead spotters positioned for overlapping arcs, how the flankers angled their approach. The kind of discipline that came from real training, not village skirmishes. "They're setting kill zones," he said quietly. "Hostile enough." Ranger's ears pricked again. His growl deepened to a warning rumble. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying faint metallic clicks, the sound of bolts being chambered. The ambush was seconds from unfolding. Below, Reese and his team had stopped at the creek's bend, unaware of the eyes above them. Ethan adjusted his dope card, aligning wind and distance. Wind west, 5 knots. Range 1500. His heartbeat slowed to a mechanical rhythm. Through the crosshair, he saw the first hostile silhouette. A man adjusting the PKM mount, face hidden by snow goggles and a brown shema. "Sarah," he said, voice cold. Permission to engage. Static answered. Then Sarah's voice came back, strained. Ethan, you're alone out there. If you fire, they'll triangulate your position. Ethan's lips twitched faintly. They'll have to find me first. He adjusted his grip, finger poised over the trigger. The world contracted into silence. No wind, no storm, no thought, only the distance between breath and bullet. He squeezed. The rifle barked, muffled by the suppressor. Through the scope, the machine gunner folded backward, lifeless. Chaos followed. Muzzle flashes erupted across the ridge as the ambushers panicked, firing wildly into the valley. The SEALs dove for cover, confused but alive. Reese's voice crackled faintly over Ethan's secondary frequency, intercepted through Sarah's feed. This is Alpha 1. We're taking heavy fire from the ridge. Who the hell's engaging them? Ethan ignored it. He was already cycling the bolt, adjusting for wind. Ranger stayed motionless beside him, eyes locked on the valley, body tense like a coiled spring. Ethan fired again. Another hostile dropped. The third target ran, slipping behind rocks. Ethan tracked him, calculated for drift, and sent a round that split the air like a whisper. The man vanished from sight. Ethan! Sarah's voice broke through again, quieter now. I have drones diverting from base, ETA 30 minutes. Can you maintain position? I'm not moving, he replied. But the SEALs need to reposition west, or they'll be boxed in. I'll relay. Minutes stretched like hours. The snow thickened until the valley seemed to dissolve into white smoke. Ethan's fingers were numb, but he didn't feel the cold anymore. Every muscle was memory. He shifted targets only when necessary, conserving ammunition, counting each heartbeat as a measure of patience. The ambushers were retreating now, dragging their dead through the snow, firing in desperation. Down below, Reese's team began to move, tactically, precisely, using the brief window Ethan had carved open. They sprinted toward the western tree line, one man limping slightly. Ethan zoomed in and caught sight of his face. Young, too young. A medic, probably. The kind of soldier who still believed in reasons. Ethan's chest tightened unexpectedly. Sarah, he whispered. They're clear. For now. Understood, she said. Hold overwatch until extraction. The storm raged on, erasing the blood and footprints alike. Ethan exhaled, resting his cheek against the rifle's stock. Ranger leaned close, pressing his head against Ethan's arm as if reminding him that he wasn't alone. Ethan let his gloved hand rest on the dog's fur. The mission wasn't over, but the immediate danger had passed. As the last echoes of gunfire faded into the howling wind, Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. For all the years he had tried to bury that part of himself, it still rose instinctively when others were in danger. Ranger gave a small, contented sigh and lay beside him, his tail twitching softly in the snow. Guess peace'll have to wait another night, Ethan murmured. The storm swallowed his words, carrying them down into the valley, where 4 men lived because he hadn't. The world exploded in white and sound. Muzzle flashes erupted like lightning against the blizzard, and the valley echoed with the chaos of war. Snow sprayed into the air as rounds chewed through ice and bark. Ethan's body reacted before thought could intervene. His eyes locked through the scope, and his breathing slowed to that strange, unnatural calm that only came in the moments between life and death. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the sound muffled by the suppressor and the storm's fury. Down below, one of the machine gunners crumpled, his weapon falling silent mid-burst. The ambush had been broken before it even began, but the enemy adapted fast. Shapes moved through the white haze, shadows armed with purpose. Ranger stayed low beside Ethan, his golden eyes never blinking, his fur bristling as every echo of gunfire rolled through the mountains like thunder. Ethan reloaded without looking, fingers numb but practiced, each movement smooth and mechanical, as if carved into muscle long ago. Through his scope, Ethan saw chaos below. The SEAL team scrambled for cover, snow flying as they dove behind fallen logs and ice ridges. Lieutenant Reese was shouting orders, his voice swallowed by the wind. He moved with precision and control, a commander born from years of surviving impossible situations. Yet even with his discipline, Ethan could see fear behind those movements. Reese's team had no idea where the rounds were coming from, or why the storm itself seemed to be shooting back. Ethan's mind focused, isolating targets through the white blur. Each shadow became a calculation. Distance, wind, drift, time. He adjusted for elevation, took a deep breath, and exhaled halfway. The trigger moved with the smallest whisper. Another man fell, then another. The storm was worsening, wind howling at 30 knots, tearing at the snowbank that shielded him. His goggles frosted, visibility shrinking by the second. He had to rely more on instinct now. Shapes, movement, rhythm. Ranger gave a low whine, glancing back as if to remind him that their world was shrinking to this narrow patch of ice and fear. Ethan gave him a quick pat on the neck, grounding himself in the warmth of that loyal presence. "We're good, boy," he whispered, though his heart was hammering. A burst of automatic fire from the east ridge cut across the valley. It wasn't aimed at the SEALs. It was searching, probing, trying to locate him. The enemy was learning. Ethan ducked lower, shifting his position by crawling sideways along the snow trench he'd dug. His breath fogged the scope. He wiped it clean with the back of his glove and found a new vantage point. Through the blur, he spotted two figures carrying long rifles, snipers by the way they moved, steady and deliberate. One crouched near a boulder, adjusting for the wind. The other was scanning, trying to catch the glint of Ethan's lens. "Not today," Ethan muttered. He adjusted the scope, reading the distance, 1,430 meters. He exhaled slowly and fired. The shot tore through the blizzard, invisible, unstoppable. The first sniper went down silently, collapsing into the snow. The second ducked, firing blindly toward the ridgeline, his tracer rounds cutting streaks of red through the gray sky. Ethan rolled to the side, repositioned, and fired again. The man's body jerked, then fell still. Below, Reese's team began moving, using the lull to their advantage. Ethan could see them dragging a wounded teammate, Petty Officer Ryan Dale, by the faint name tag that flashed through the snowlight. Dale was in his late 20s, lean, his face pale under the streak of blood on his cheek. He limped, clutching his rifle but refusing to be carried. Ethan respected that kind of stubborn pride. Reese motioned for them to move west, toward the tree line. They were learning to trust the unseen guardian above them. Ethan's radio crackled faintly. Sarah's voice came through, broken by interference. "Ethan, we're picking up signals. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the north. You need to pull back before they locate you." "Negative," Ethan replied calmly, still tracking through his scope. "Not until they're clear." Sarah's tone hardened, but beneath it was concern. "You're one man against 20 in a storm that's eating our comms alive. Don't turn this into a suicide mission." Ethan smiled faintly, though no one could see it. "Wasn't planning to die today, ma'am." He shifted his aim toward the north ridge. Sure enough, Movement. 4 new hostiles advancing through the storm. Their shapes were faint, almost ghost-like, but their weapons gleamed when lightning cracked above the peaks. He fired 3 times in precise rhythm. 2 fell instantly. The third fired back but hit nothing but snow. Ranger suddenly growled low, turning his head behind them. Ethan froze, then twisted to look. Through the swirling snow, a shadow moved, someone approaching their position from the rear. Ethan grabbed his sidearm, motioning Ranger to stay low. A man stumbled into view, an American uniform, snow-caked, face pale from exhaustion. He raised his hands immediately. "Don't shoot! I'm with the SEAL team!" His voice cracked, raw with cold. Ethan kept his pistol trained until he recognized the man. One of Reese's, separated from the others. "Name," Ethan demanded. "Corporal James Ward," the man gasped. He was young, maybe 25. Freckles dusted across wind-burned skin, eyes sharp but panicked. His lips were turning blue from exposure. "Got hit when the fire started. Got separated. I followed the gunfire. Yours, I guess." Ethan lowered the weapon slightly. "You're lucky I didn't miss." Ward gave a shaky grin. "Sir, from what I've seen, you don't miss." He collapsed to his knees, shivering. Ethan motioned him closer to the snow trench, pulling a thermal blanket from his pack. Ranger sniffed him warily, then settled beside the man, sharing his body heat. "Stay quiet," Ethan said. "We're not done yet." Over the next 10 minutes, the gunfire faded. The valley fell eerily silent except for the wind. Through his scope, Ethan watched the last of the enemy retreat down the far ridge, dragging their wounded with them. The SEALs were gone now, swallowed by the forest and the storm. Alive, because he and Ranger had made it so. He slowly lowered his rifle, his muscles trembling as adrenaline drained from his veins. Ranger lay beside him, his head on Ethan's boot, eyes half closed. For a long moment, Ethan just listened, to the heartbeat in his ears, to the hiss of snow against his parka, to the absence of death. He turned to Ward, who was staring out over the valley, disbelief written across his face. "Who are you?" the young soldier asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer. He simply looked toward the horizon, where the storm's edge met the faint glimmer of dawn. The snow had begun to ease, flakes falling gently like ash after a fire. Somewhere below, 4 men would live to see another sunrise. "Pack your things," Ethan said finally. "We move before the storm clears. They'll come looking for who did this." Ward nodded, still wide-eyed. Ethan slung his rifle over his shoulder, patted Ranger once on the head, and started down the ridge. The snow swallowed their tracks almost instantly. Behind them, silence returned. Deep, eternal, and clean. Anchorage lay under a bruised winter sky, the streets glazed with ice that reflected the dull orange of the morning sun. Ethan Cole walked through the snow-dusted alleyway toward a windowless concrete building hidden behind a frozen airfield. The structure had no markings, no flag, nothing that revealed its purpose. It looked abandoned, but the steel door at the entrance opened with the mechanical precision of a secure lock, followed by the faint scent of disinfectant and metal. Ranger padded beside him, his black and tan fur standing out against the white world, tail low but alert. The dog's breath came out in slow puffs, eyes shifting with silent awareness. 6 days had passed since the firefight in Nick Valley, but the echoes of gunfire still rang faintly in Ethan's mind. The kind of sound that doesn't fade, only burrows deeper until silence becomes its only disguise. Inside, the air was dry and cold, humming with electricity. He followed a narrow hallway that led into a debriefing room, bare except for a metal table, 2 chairs, and a large monitor glowing pale blue. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood near the far end, arms crossed, eyes sharp behind frameless glasses. She was still in her duty uniform, though her sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing sinewy forearms marked by faint scars. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was tied in a knot that looked as unyielding as her posture. Years of command had carved a certain stillness into her, the stillness of a woman who'd learned to carry her battles inward. When she turned to face him, her expression softened slightly. "You look like hell, Ethan," she said. He gave a faint grin. "You should see the other guy." Before she could answer, another voice entered the room, calm, deliberate, edged with bureaucratic certainty. "The other guy, in this case, happens to be dead. All 20 of them." Ethan turned toward the sound. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped into the light, his polished shoes silent against the floor. He looked to be in his early 50s, with neatly combed silver hair and the kind of angular features that spoke of both authority and detachment. His tie was a muted navy, his coat crisp even in the stale air of the room. Behind the professional veneer was something colder, the kind of man who'd spent his life dealing in secrets rather than lives. His name was Thomas Gray, a senior analyst from the Strategic Defense Directorate, though Ethan suspected that title was a front for something deeper. Gray extended a gloved hand. "Mr. Cole, it's an honor." Ethan shook it without warmth. "Let's skip the formalities, Director. You didn't drag me into this freezer to talk about honor." Gray smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No, I came to talk about possibilities." Sarah gestured toward the table. "Sit, both of you." Ethan lowered himself into the metal chair, Ranger lying at his feet, resting his head on his paws. Sarah tapped a remote, and the screen on the wall flickered to life. Drone footage from the Nick Valley engagement filled the room. Thermal silhouettes moving through a storm, bursts of light, and then impossibly precise kill shots appearing in sequence. Ethan's work, seen through the unblinking eye of technology. 20 confirmed hostiles, Sarah said, her voice even. Wind speeds at 30 knots, visibility near zero. You neutralize targets at over 1,500 meters with a rifle designed for half that range. No calibration error, no double trigger pulls. Every shot accounted for. She paused. Even Gray here doesn't believe it. Gray leaned back, folding his hands. Let's just say physics suggests otherwise. But belief doesn't matter when the results are undeniable. His gaze shifted to Ethan. I've reviewed hundreds of sniper operations across 3 theaters. No one has ever done what you did. Not in those conditions. Ethan shrugged. Maybe they just didn't have enough reason. Sarah studied him carefully. You ever think maybe that's the problem? You keep surviving missions nobody should. You walk out of hell as if the fire doesn't touch you. But one day, Ethan, it might. Her tone carried the weight of someone who'd already buried too many names. For a moment, the silence stretched, the hum of the overhead light, the soft breathing of Ranger the only sounds. Gray broke the stillness. We're not here to lecture him. We're here to offer him a choice. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A choice? Gray nodded. The Pentagon's authorized the formation of a covert sniper overwatch initiative. We call it Project Shadow Guardian. The concept is simple. Operators like you, independent, unseen, protecting frontline units from distances so vast, the enemy never knows what hit them. No flags, no credit, No recognition. You've already proven it works. Ethan's expression didn't change. You want me to build an army of ghosts. Not an army, Sarah interjected. A handful. Hand-picked, trained by you. People who can do what you do. Or at least try to. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his jaw, the scrape of stubble audible in the quiet. You think you can train that? What I do isn't just skill, Sarah. It's... He hesitated, glancing down at Ranger. Discipline, instinct, something you don't measure in target scores. Gray's tone was flat. We're not asking for saints, Mr. Cole. Just results. Ranger lifted his head then, as if sensing the tension, amber eyes flicking between the humans. Ethan's hand dropped automatically to the dog's neck, grounding him again. Sarah's voice softened. Ethan, you could make a difference. No more watching good soldiers die because they were outnumbered or outgunned. You could create the next generation of Overwatch operators. The people who save lives without being seen. He stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words against the ghosts of the valley still walking in his mind. And if I say no? Gray smiled politely. Then we thank you for your service, bury the data, and pretend you were never there. But I think you've already made your decision. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The dog tilted his head slightly, one ear flicking as if in response to a question only they shared. Ethan sighed. I'll do it, but on one condition. Sarah folded her arms. Name it. Ranger comes with me. Wherever I go, whatever program you build, he's my second set of eyes. Gray looked skeptical. You want to bring a dog into classified training? Ethan met his gaze coldly. You wanted a ghost. He's part of the shadow. Sarah smiled, just slightly. Done. Gray made a note on his tablet. We'll start recruitment immediately. You'll have the resources you need. Ethan stood, gathering his jacket, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Then let's build your ghosts. As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice followed him. Ethan, just remember, darkness changes people. Don't lose yourself in it. He paused by the door, looking back over his shoulder. Don't worry. The darkness doesn't scare me anymore. Outside, the snow had started falling again. Soft, steady, cleansing. Ranger trotted ahead, his paws leaving clean tracks that the wind quickly erased. Anchorage lay silent beneath the gray sky, and somewhere deep inside that silence, the first ember of a new shadow was born. 2 years had passed since the day the snow fell outside Anchorage, and Ethan Cole agreed to lead a team that didn't exist on paper. Now, deep in the Montana wilderness, he stood on the edge of a snow-covered firing range, the wind slicing across the open valley like a blade. The mountains around the base glowed pale beneath the winter moon, the peaks crowned with white firelight from the northern sky. Behind him, the low hum of the generator buzzed through the barracks, mingling with the distant bark of Ranger. Older now, slower in movement, but still sharp as the steel in Ethan's rifle. At 9 years old, the German Shepherd had silver streaks at the edges of his muzzle, but his eyes still burned bright. The same golden fire that had seen Ethan through every battlefield, every storm. Inside the training facility, 4 recruits stood in silence, each with a different kind of restlessness carved into their faces. Ethan moved between them like a shadow, calm, unreadable, his voice even and deliberate. You'll learn everything I know, he said. But before you learn to pull the trigger, you'll learn when not to. The first was Jack Moreno, a former Marine sniper with the build of a mountain, broad shoulders, shaved head, and a jaw that looked carved from stone. His right hand trembled faintly when he wasn't holding a weapon, a ghost of nerve damage from shrapnel in Fallujah. Despite his quiet demeanor, he carried the anger of someone who had lost too many friends and never found peace. Ethan recognized that rage. It was the same one he'd once carried like a wound that never healed. Next was Lena Brooks, the youngest of the group, barely 26. She was lean and wiry, with short-cropped blonde hair and gray eyes that didn't blink much. A former police markswoman from Minnesota, she had a scar on her left cheek, the legacy of a hostage situation gone wrong. The little girl she'd tried to save had died, and that guilt lived in her posture, in the way she always stood a few feet behind everyone else. Ethan didn't push her. He just watched. Sometimes silence trained people better than words. The third, Malik Johnson, was tall and narrow-shouldered, his face framed by a neatly trimmed beard. His calm, analytical gaze reminded Ethan of a scientist more than a soldier. Before joining, Malik had been an engineer specializing in ballistics testing. He never raised his voice, never argued. But when he fired, his precision was almost supernatural. Ethan valued him for that patience, the kind born not from confidence, but from control. The last recruit was Tomas Vega, a quiet man from Texas with dark brown eyes and a cross tattooed on his forearm. A devout Christian, he'd once been a medic in a rescue unit before losing his entire team to an IED explosion in Syria. He carried a rosary in his pocket at all times, fingers brushing over it before every shot. "Faith steadies the hand," he once told Ethan. And Ethan, who had long since stopped believing in miracles, found himself unable to disagree. Together, they were the first generation of Shadow Guardians, operators whose names would never appear on rosters, whose faces would never show in photographs. Ethan trained them not only to shoot at 2,000 meters, but to disappear like ghosts, to move unseen, to watch over soldiers who would never know they existed. "You're not hunters," he reminded them. "You're shields. You kill only to protect. That's what separates us from them." Outside, the snow thickened into a quiet storm. Ranger paced the edge of the range, his tail leaving lines through the powder. The recruits lay prone in the snow, scopes glinting faintly under the floodlights. Ethan walked behind them, his breath visible, his eyes sharp. "Wind 5 knots east," he said softly. "Adjust your drift. Lena, you're breathing too fast." She exhaled, stilled herself, and fired. The distant steel target rang like a bell. Ethan nodded once. Hours later, when the range lights dimmed and the recruits retreated to the barracks, Ethan stayed behind. He stood alone, rifle slung over his shoulder, looking up at the falling snow. Ranger sat beside him, ears twitching, head resting against Ethan's leg. "We did it, old boy," Ethan murmured. "They're learning." The dog let out a soft groan of acknowledgement, eyes half closed. Behind him, footsteps crunched in the snow. Sarah Mitchell appeared, bundled in a long gray coat, her breath misting in the cold. The years had etched faint lines around her mouth, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You never did learn to rest," she said, her tone half reprimand, half affection. Ethan turned to her with a faint smile. "I thought you retired." "I did," she replied, stepping closer. "But I needed to see it for myself, what you've built here." Her gaze drifted toward the barracks, where the recruits' voices echoed faintly. "They're good, Ethan. Better than I expected." "They'll have to be," he said quietly. "The world doesn't get any safer." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You know, The Pentagon still thinks this program is theoretical. They have no idea how many lives your ghosts have saved already. That's the point, Ethan replied. If they knew, we'd have to stop. She laughed softly. Still the same old idealist? He shrugged. Someone has to be. They stood together in silence, watching the snow fall. Ranger barked once, then lay down between them, his tail sweeping the snow like a metronome. Sarah's expression softened as she knelt and scratched behind the dog's ear. He's aging well, she said. He's earned it, Ethan replied. He's the only one here who doesn't need to prove anything. From across the valley, faint lights appeared, headlights weaving slowly through the snow. A convoy approached, tires crunching on ice. Sarah turned to him. Extraction team returning from their op, one of your Guardian units. Ethan said nothing, but his eyes followed the lights as they neared the base gates. He knew the drill. No names, no questions, only results. The radio crackled in the tower. Team Charlie returning, all personnel accounted for. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. They made it, he said softly. That's all that matters. Sarah nodded. You kept your promise. Ethan looked up at the stars, barely visible through the falling snow. We kept it. He reached down, rubbing Ranger's neck. The dog's eyes glowed amber under the floodlight, reflecting the faint shimmer of the moon. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, a soft, almost forgotten sound carried by the wind. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. As Sarah turned to leave, she paused and looked back. You know, if there's ever another war, they'll need more Guardians. Ethan smiled faintly, eyes still on the sky. There's always another war, but maybe this time, there'll be more light to keep it at bay. When she was gone, he stayed there, unmoving, snow gathering on his shoulders. Ranger pressed closer to him for warmth. Ethan whispered, "We did good, partner." The wind answered with a low moan, carrying the sound of distant bells and the promise of peace. Fragile, fleeting, but real for tonight. In the quiet of Montana's winter night, as snow drifted gently across the barracks and the church bells faded into silence, Ethan realized that miracles weren't always thunder and fire. Sometimes they were the still, invisible hands that kept others safe. The same way his team had become silent protectors, each of us can be someone's unseen guardian. A kind word, a small act of faith, a prayer whispered when no one's listening. Perhaps that's how God works in this world, not through grand displays, but through the hearts he steadies when the storm comes. Every shot Ethan fired, every soul he saved, was never just about war. It was about grace. The light he kept was the same light that flickers inside anyone who refuses to give up on goodness, even when surrounded by darkness. Ranger, now older and slower, stood beside him as a living reminder that loyalty, like faith, doesn't fade. It only deepens with time. Maybe the true miracle isn't surviving the storm, but choosing to walk back into it, again and again, for the sake of someone else. So as you finish this story, take a moment to look around your own life. There are people who stand watch for you in silence, just as you might be someone's quiet guardian without realizing it. If you believe in unseen blessings, in the small miracles that hold this world together, share this story with someone who needs light tonight.